back, everyone, to Give God 90, radio on demand, as I like to say. My name is Jerry Mitchell, your host for Give God 90. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you join me for just a little bit as we look at something today I hope is going to be a blessing to you. I know a lot of people are concerned, especially in today's world, and what I want to look at is, what are you afraid of? Really? Seriously, what are you afraid of? Why do you think you have to hide? There are people promoting. There's absolutely more than one person out there promoting that Christians have to hide. Christians and Jews, we need to be protected. We need to be seeking, trying to dive under that wing of our Creator. We need to be looking for protection. We need to be out there hiding from all the evil in the world. Let me ask you, where in the Bible does it say hide? Where in the Bible does it say be afraid? Where in the Bible, anywhere, does it say that you are not protected if you're doing things the way you're designed to live? If you're living the life you're designed to live, what do you have to be afraid of? And we're going to look into some of that today. But before I really start digging into that, we're getting more and more people all the time, and I really appreciate all the new folks out there. It is wonderful to have you. My faithful followers, we love you. Keep following. Hope, don't let me offend you by greeting the new folks. Okay, they're coming in to this as well. But here's what I want to say for the new folks. If you have not downloaded the Give God 90 app, it's out there. It's free. It's available to you. The people who have already been listening to this are paying for this, so you don't have to. Hopefully one day, if you keep seeing value in this, you will be saying, I want to reach people too, so you can add to that growing number, and we will certainly take a whole lot of pleasure in that, you supporting us as well, with not only your prayers and if you can afford it, your finances, that's fine, but living the life that your Creator designed you to live, that is the greatest support you can show for what we do here at Give God 90. Now that advertisement's over, and I'm don't want to sound like we're begging for finances out there. That's not what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is trying to get folks to live the way they were designed to live. That's what we're after. That's what we're trying to promote. Now, to dig into what I want to talk about. This is something that irritates me, and that is probably going to show through, so I'm not even going to try to hide it. When I hear pastors and I hear teachers who are supposed to be biblical teachers say, the church has to go underground. The church has to do this. We have to hide from the evil. We should be separate. Yes, we should be separate. But you cannot be an example if people cannot find you. You cannot be that nation of priests. And I shouldn't really say nation, because today we think of nations as specific countries. But the people who make up Israel, not the nation, the people, those children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and those folks who join with them, that is this nation that I'm talking about, and it spreads political boundaries. It spreads geographic boundaries, because it is worldwide. You are part of a huge organization of people. Some people practice Judaism, wonderful. Some people practice Christianity, great. What I'm talking about is underneath of all that. Underneath of all that, the people who worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not just their direct descendants, but the people who have chosen to join with them. Just like Ruth did. The people who have accepted that family name. The people who have chosen to allow their Creator to adopt them. Okay, that's the folks I'm looking at. If you want to think of it as being grafted in, then think of it as being grafted in. But you are part of a worldwide organization. And there are people in this worldwide organization, and they're great people, but they're just confused because they believe we should be hiding. They believe we should be cowering in a corner somewhere. Now is not the time to be cowering in a corner. All right? Things are starting to get hot and heavy as we wind down this era of time that we are living in, and it's getting ready to transition into the next phase of whatever our Creator is going to choose to do. I'm not saying it's the end of the world next week or tomorrow. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is we are getting ready to see a transition of what's happening now into what the Almighty has planned next. Okay? And again, as we look at this transition, it's not going to be an overnight, snap of a finger. It's going to be a process, and many of us are going to be alive to see this process played out. Many of us should be able to recognize the things that are happening. And I'm not going to get into those things right now. That may be forthcoming before long. And I need to address some of these things because there is some confusion out there about that as well. But what I'm looking at, and what I want to specifically address today, is that you don't have anything to be afraid of. You don't have anything to fear. You don't have anything to worry about if, and here's a big if, you're living the way your Creator designed you to live. And we're going to see this played out as we look at 2 Kings. And I'm going to spread this out over 2 Kings. And I don't want you to be confused, but we look at 2 Kings, and there is a tremendous amount of turbulence in the nation, the geographic nation of Israel at this time. Particularly Judah. I mean, they are really starting to screw up. That's just plain and simple. That is the easiest way I know to say it in today's vernacular English. They were messing up big time. All right? Now, if we start looking, there are battles that are raging in 2 Kings. There are things that are happening in 2 Kings. But there is a theme throughout. All right? So we look at this. If we look at 2 Kings 6, we see Elisha. And he's talking to the servant of God. He says, look, you don't know what's happening. You can't see what's happening. And Elisha prays to the Almighty, and he says, look, just open his eyes so that he can see what's going on. And the servant's eyes were opened. He looked around, and he saw God's army. He saw the chariots of fire. He saw the warriors. He saw everything. And he knew it was going to be okay. He knew it was going to be okay. Right after we have that example, we read about 4 lepers. Now, here are a group of people who don't fit in anywhere. Okay, they can't be with the healthy people, even in a siege, or I should say a city under siege, where, a donkey's head was selling for 80 shekels. That's how hungry people were. They were begging the king, kill your son and serve him to us. We're hungry. That's how hungry they were. That's how desperate these people were. The lepers who were outside the gate, trapped in this no man's land, because they couldn't go inside, they were lepers. They couldn't go to the enemy camp, they'd have been killed. They finally look at each other and they said, look, if we stay here, we're going to die. If we go inside the city, we're going to die. If we go to the enemy's camp, they might take pity on us, but we're going to die. So what are we going to do? And after some conversation, we should say, they decided to go to the enemy's camp. Well, when they walked in, there was nobody there. Nobody was still at the enemy camp. And the lepers started to plunder, and they're like, wait a minute, what are we doing? This isn't right. You know, we're still the children of Abraham. What are we doing? We've got to go tell somebody. If we wait till daylight, though, we can't go to the gate at daylight. They're going to see what we are. They're going to see we have leprosy. So they went at night, before it was light. And even then, the people inside the city didn't believe. And they very cautiously sent folks out. You know, it's kind of like sticking your toe in the water to see how cold it is before you jump in, right? Well, all of this goes to say that here is this group of people. Here's the lesson we can learn from this little passage. This group of people who didn't belong anywhere. And I know people like this. I am people like this. I can't go into a modern Christian church because I know the things that the modern Christian church is teaching isn't right. I don't fit in with a lot of places because what I teach comes straight out of the Bible. And I look at these lessons that we are to learn, and there are people out there that these lessons, they make them uncomfortable because these lessons that we have in the Bible are about real people, real situations, people who believe. Now, whatever led these 4 lepers to have leprosy, we're not told. It's not important. It doesn't matter why they didn't belong. We just know that they didn't belong. They couldn't be in the siege city. They couldn't be in the enemy's camp. They were caught in a no man's land. They were caught in this place where nobody wanted them. And yet they had enough faith. And they were so desperate. Now, faith and desperation, it seems, go hand in hand in today's world. And even back then, they were driven almost to faith through their desperation. But instead of hiding, instead of gathering together and waiting to die, they took some action. They went out. They went out into that camp and they discovered the enemy had left. You know what? Sometimes we need to go to the enemy's camp. Sometimes we need to go and see what we can find. Sometimes we should do that before we reach desperation. We should have enough faith and believe in our Creator that He is going to protect us, that we should boldly go. Now, I'm not saying walk into a hornet's nest here, okay? You go when the Almighty tells you to. I'm not saying walk blindly into a situation you don't know, you don't understand. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you look at the evidence. They weighed the evidence. If we do this, we die. If we do that, we die. If we do that, we die. And what did they decide to do? They decided to take the action that was not necessarily the path of least resistance. They took the action that was probably the most bold thing they could do. And that was walk into the camp of an enemy, walk into certain death. But yet, they lived. Now, I said that 2 Kings was probably the most tumultuous place. It was filled with turmoil. It was probably, out of all the books of the Bible, the most violent. It was right up there anyway. Because you have cities under siege, you have battles raging, you have all of these things going on, and among all of that, you have Israel and Judah deciding, well, you know what, we're going to sin. Now, this had been building for a long, long time. And finally, the Almighty says, enough's enough. And he's going to kick them out. And when we get up to chapter 19, we read about a conversation that takes place at the gate of the city. And I encourage you to go read that, because it is a conversation that really lays the groundwork for a lot of things. But what comes out of that is we're introduced in Kings to a prophet named Isaiah, who reassures the people. He's like, yeah, you screwed up. You blew it. You really blew it. But it's going to be okay. I have to take a little bit of a sidebar here. We're going to stop with the you blew it for a second. And I want to look at people like Isaiah, people like Elisha, people like Elijah, people, maybe some people are even thinking, I don't know, let's look at the New Testament, maybe Paul or Peter or Timothy, some of these folks, and they look at these people and they say, well, I can never be like them. You know, those people were so wonderful. They were so close to perfect. They were so close to God. You know what? No, they weren't. If we read about these people's lives, we know what they were like. Look at David. Do you think David was perfect? But what was David able to accomplish? Abraham wasn't perfect. His father made idols, right? We look at Abraham's family. Is it any wonder God said, Abraham, if you want a relationship with me, you got to leave where you are. You can't stay there. You can't stay in your father's house and worship me. We look at Elisha. Elisha wasn't perfect. Elisha made mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. But what they all had in common, even Peter, you know, we read about Peter. Peter made mistakes. Peter, you know, had a hard head, but his heart was in the right place. All of them were no different than any of us today, except they were willing. They were willing to live the way they were designed to live. You know, when God said, I need you to hear, they would go there. When God said, I need you to tell somebody this, they would tell that person exactly what God had said, no more, no less. And when God said, today's the day you rest, they rested. They lived according to the Creator's instructions. And we look at these people a lot of times and we say, you know, oh, to be a prophet. Oh, to be a prophet? No, 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 no. You don't want to be a prophet. You don't want to, you know, Isaiah, one of the accounts of his death was he was put in a hollow log and sawn in half. Okay? The disciple John, let's look at him. They couldn't kill him. They tried to beat him. They tried to stone him. They tried to boil him alive in oil by some accounts. That's not in the Bible. It's in some extra biblical stuff. But they tried to boil him in oil. They couldn't kill him, so they exiled him on an island. You think you read about these people and know their lives, and you look up to them. Are you willing to go through what they went through? It's tough to go through what they go through. They had a life of, they had a life that was tormented. They had a life where people hated them. They weren't loved. Nobody loves somebody who says, you're messing up. You're blowing it. You are really, really, just flat out wrong here. How many times, if we look around at our family and friends, and if we have stood up and said, what you're doing isn't right, doesn't matter what it was about. Whether it was they were in a relationship with somebody that you knew they were going to wind up hurt, okay? And you try to warn them. They blow you off. They get mad at you. Maybe maybe you say you shouldn't go there to go to work. There's things there you won't be able to do. There's things there that how's a good way to say this? I'm thinking of a certain situation. I don't want to get detailed about it. But there are things there where it will separate you from the people you love. Let's put it that way. And they look at you and say, but it's a really good paying job. And they go there and they start getting sucked into a lifestyle. And then they're mad at you. You tried to warn them. You told them what it was going to be like. But yet they're mad at you because you didn't stop them. And we don't always address those things as good as we could either. When someone's beginning a relationship with someone that they're going to get hurt in the end, and you try to tell them, you try to guide them out of it, and yet they follow that anyway. And you say, you know what? When it's all over and done with, and they come back and you say, well, I told you so. That's not a good way to go back into that conversation, is it? So sometimes we're not very kind when it comes to that. And sometimes we don't need to be. We have the examples of these folks. And they were very straightforward. They were very blunt sometimes when they were giving these warnings. Elisha warned the king. He says, look, you know what? You don't want to go there. You don't want to go there. And the king's like, yeah, I do. Well, what's Elisha to do? He can't stop the king. It's up to the king. You do what you want, king. It ain't going to be pretty. That was his warning. And that's where he left it. Fathers, especially when they look at their daughters and say, don't be involved with this person. I'm going to make it difficult for you to be involved with this person. Sometimes the daughters, they just want to go be involved anyway, and you can't do a whole lot with them. But that's exactly the same thing that the prophets were doing. They were making the right decisions easy for these kings and leaders. They were making the wrong decisions very difficult for them. It's what we do with our families. It's what we do with our friends. But in 2 Kings 19, when Isaiah reassures the people, we go all the way down to verse 35, and we see what the Almighty can do. Even in the midst of the people being rebellious, even in the midst of the people going through this exile, we see that God steps in and kills 185,000 of the enemy of Israel. Sometimes we read these and we say, oh, how could God be so violent? How could God be so arrogant? And I hear this all the time, and I say, you don't understand. You don't understand. He had to display power, to display authority, and to display His glory and His desire for His children to return to Him and live the way they were designed to live. We go through things in our lives quite often, and we don't recognize it as these warning signs. We don't recognize it as these posts in our road, where you have this flashing light. Sometimes it's a parent, sometimes it's a child, sometimes it's a friend, but they're this flashing warning sign that says, you don't want to go there. And we get mad at them. Now, sometimes, you have to be ready to discern what they're saying. Is it coming from them or is it coming from God? If it's coming from them, they're going to benefit selfishly for what they say. If it's coming from God, they're going to suffer unselfishly for what they say. Let me say that again. If what they're saying comes from their own understanding, you yourself are going to persecute that person. They're going to suffer from you, but they're going to gain something. If what they say comes from God, okay, they don't gain anything other than the persecution, whether it comes from you or somebody else. Quite often, they feel like they've lost something. Do you think any of the prophets, do you think any of the leaders of the ancient Judah or the ancient Israel ever felt that they had gained anything? Really, what did they accomplish? What did they have? If they were really, really doing things that God wanted them to do, they didn't have anything personally to gain from that. God did. It revealed His glory. It revealed His authority. It revealed His majesty. But the individual, whether it was prophet, whether it was a king, didn't matter who, eventually they died. Those 4 lepers eventually died. Included in 2 Kings is when it says that Elisha died and was buried, and they were burying him, and the enemies were coming in, and they threw this other body in Elisha's grave. The other body touched Elisha and came back to life, right? Elisha was still dead. He was buried, eventually. The other person who came back to life, he eventually died again. If that makes sense. What I'm saying is, what are we afraid of? What do we have to gain by fear? What do we have to gain by hiding? Nowhere in Scripture do you see anything written about hiding. There are times, yes, when you go out and you are alone. When you seek that solitude, when you find that place that you can go to recharge your batteries, to get in tune, where you have that time of prayer. That's not hiding. That's different. There are people out there today who are promoting going underground, okay? Being a covert operation. How can you be a covert operation and still be an example to the people who need you to be the example? How can you hide? We're going to go in a cave, and we're going to go, a mile back in this cave. We're going to light this little candle. That's our light. We're going to let it shine right here in this cave where nobody can see it. That's not the plan. Isaiah reassures the people. And once those people are reassured, the Almighty steps in, and He does something so miraculous that everybody understands what happened. Sometimes you see it in your own life. When you are that desperate, and your desperation drives you back to your faith, something happens. And you say, you know what? He was there all along, but it was me that couldn't see it. That happens. Unfortunately, it happens way too often. But for an entire church, for an entire organization to say, we're going to hide, it's not our job to hide. It's our job to be out there in front of these people. It's our job to be visible, to be seen, so that when these people who are hurting, when these people who are lost and helpless and desperate and searching for their faith, they've got to be looking for you. They've got to be able to find you. Those are the people we're looking for. And those are the people we need to help. Those are the people we're responsible for. Those are the folks that we have got to gather to ourselves and help. Is there going to be people in there who are going to try to hurt you? Yeah, there are. Are there going to be people who don't believe you? Yeah, there are. Are there going to be people who the enemy sends to disrupt your goodwill, your good faith? Yeah, that's what the enemy does. But that doesn't mean that we get to sit back and hide. It doesn't mean we get to keep God to ourselves. It doesn't work that way. We've got to get out in front. We've got to we've got to stop being so passive, and we've got to start being more aggressive. I know that sounds contrary to what you have always been taught, but you've got to put your faith out there. You've got to be the example. If you really believe that there is nothing you can do outside of God's will, that's probably not the way to say that. If you truly believe that you can do anything through Him, as long as you're doing it for Him, that's where you don't crawl in a hole and hide. I know people who say, well, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, and we've got to be careful. Yes, we do have to be careful. We can't just go out and be, what's a good way to say it? We just can't go out and be reckless and careless. But you've got to be out there among the people. You've got to be... Your light does absolutely no good in the back of a cave where nobody else can see it. If the sun was behind the clouds, you don't get to see the brightness of it, do you? You know it's there, but you can't quite get hold of it. You can't see the brightness. You can't see the color. You can't see everything you need to see. Don't hide. Don't be afraid. How many times in Scripture do we see the words, don't be afraid or fear not? Really? Seriously? There's nothing to be afraid of. If the worst thing the enemy can do is kill you in your mind, that's not the worst thing the enemy can do. You want me to tell you what the worst thing the enemy can do is? Leave you alone. If he kills you, if you die, what happens to you? If he leaves you alone, if the enemy leaves you alone, that's when you get complacent. That's when you get careless. That's when you get reckless. That is when you start to think, well, I've got this. I've got this. That's when it's dangerous. When the enemy leaves you alone, that's when you are most vulnerable to yourself. Don't be afraid. Face it head on. There's no need to hide. There is that time you need to be out there in the field, so to speak, like Isaac was, meditating. Okay? There's that time you need to be, just as Yeshua was, in that deep, sorrowful prayer. There's that time you need to be, and this is going to sound funny, but there's that time each of us need to be sort of in that belly of the fish, so that we know who's in control. Because even when Jonah got out of the belly of the fish, where did he go? He didn't go hide. In fact, Jonah was trying to hide, and that's how he wound up in the fish. He got out of the belly of the fish, and he went straight to the worst place he knew of. And he walked through his Nineveh, and he proclaimed the glory of the Father. It's what we have to do every day. Get up, get out of bed, get dressed, and go meet the day. And be the example that the Almighty wants us to be. Not for us, but for Him. Ladies and gentlemen, go be that example. Go be the best you can be. Live the way you're designed to live. Hope this has been a blessing to you. Please enjoy and have a very blessed week.